Welcome, everyone, to Latter Daily Digest. We honor creators, and today we have the creator of a relatively new channel called the Mormon Auditor. Thanks, Mormon Auditor, for coming on our show.
Thanks for having me, Gene.
So I notice your name is kind of strange. Your parents named you Mormon, and your surname is Auditor, and
Yeah.
I don't know what country that comes from, but
Yeah.
anyway, I'm just kidding.
I think it's Swedish.
You're going a little bit undercover right now with
Yeah.
a name, a pseudonym, and that's okay. We've had a few people on like that before. Tell us a little bit about your growing up, where you've lived, what schools were like, what it was like to be a young man. I guess you were born Mormon,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and you know your priesthood leadership experiences when you were 12.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
I mean, I definitely grew up very Mormon, very much. I believe I'm 8th generation Mormon. So we go back to, I had ancestors coming over from England in the days of Joseph Smith and stuff. So we go back the whole way and, been spread out. But yeah, I grew up in Boise, Idaho, and spent, from the time I was 1 until the time I was 10 in Boise. So it was a good experience. I really enjoyed that time of life. And then,
were you able to go to any Boise State football games as a 10-year-old or 9-year-old?
I did not. Well, if I did, I don't remember them.
Right.
I don't think I was paying attention.
Were you aware of them?
I don't think so at that point. No, I'm still not really a sports person. I don't really pay attention to anything sports related.
Yeah.
So
The thing about Boise football is they have a blue field. That's the main thing.
oh, gotcha.
So that would be an experience you probably wouldn't forget.
Yeah.
If you like sports.
Yeah. I mean, I'll listen to you talk about sports, but I won't be able to contribute in any meaningful way.
There you go.
Yeah. But yeah, Boise was great. I enjoyed, we were in a tight knit ward. All of my friends were members of the church, all that kind of stuff. So I very much kind of grew up in the bubble. My dad worked for the church. He was a landscape architect, and so he's worked for the church my whole life, for as long as I can remember. He's retired now, but that kind of took us around. So when I was 10, we moved to the Philippines, and he was, in charge of building meeting houses and stuff in Southeast Asia. And so I spent 3 years in the Philippines at that age.
So you became a deacon in the Philippines?
Yeah, I did. And it was a good experience, but also very much like culture shock too. I didn't really know what to do, especially coming from just like a very Mormon town to now just like a completely different culture and everything. So,
and you went to a local ward?
Well, it was actually an expat ward. So it was like a bunch of like senior missionaries and stuff like that. It was, there were maybe 70 or so people in that ward, a mix of like Americans and Filipinos and stuff. And missionaries and church employees and stuff. Sorry, what was that?
English-speaking Filipinos mostly.
Yeah. Well, everyone in the Philippines speaks English as a second language. So I didn't really learn too much Tagalog except saying "Saan ang CR," which is "Where's the bathroom?" That's really the only one I remember.
And is Spanish like the third language that they speak?
Yeah, it's very much related to Spanish. They also mix Tagalog with Spanish, and yeah, they mix together
like
all 3 languages.
Bengalig, just like in California we have what do we call it? Mexican English, I don't know, Spanglish.
Right. Yeah. I think they call it Taglish.
Taglish. Oh, that's pretty good.
But I guess that's, I can't remember if that's Tagalog in English or Tagalog in Spanish. Maybe it's both. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like, but they throw whatever in that whole soup.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So yeah, that was a good experience, but it was also very much culture shock, and I had to adapt. That was those years. I just spent a lot of time just like reading books and watching Cartoon Network and stuff.
Now, was there ever a cold day in the Philippines?
Not that I remember. I mean, I don't remember ever having to wear a jacket. So Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I remember swimming on Christmas Day every year at our local like community pool.
And I guess below the equator, that Christmas is summertime anyway.
Yeah, well, at that point, there really is no distinction in the seasons. It's just
Yeah.
always the same.
Compared to Boise with 4 seasons,
Right.
the Philippines is just like summer always.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. So that was definitely an interesting growing experience. But then when we moved away from the Philippines, we came back to Utah, and so then I was just hanging out with all of my good Mormon buddies in my ward and neighborhood and stuff in Utah. So even though I have moved around a little bit, I still feel very much like I grew up in the Mormon bubble, just because even in the Philippines, my associates were mostly just like in the branch, and you know
Right.
my my dad's coworkers and senior
Right.
missionaries and stuff like that. So
It was almost like your dad was the mission president of the Philippine plants.
yeah, yeah, that's a good way of describing
3 years, spent 3 years in charge. The plants grew fabulously, I bet, under his
it.
guidance.
Yeah,
And this was just like the church was growing back then.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
But
Um,
were you aware of his work as a 13-year-old in the Philippines? Did you ever
yeah,
go?
he has especially in the Philippines, he was more of a project manager for meeting houses, and so he was helping manage where they were building meeting houses and making sure they were being constructed properly and stuff like that. So yeah, I was very much aware of all of that stuff that he was doing. He Every time we'd go to a town, he'd point out like, I helped build that meeting house and stuff like that.
Did you
So
ever do it? Did he ever do it? Take my Mormon auditor son to work day?
um,
Not in
he
the
did
Philippines.
actually. Yeah, I do remember going into his office a few times.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. He didn't call me Mormon Auditor back
A-
then.
And what city? What city did you move to in Utah?
To Sandy, Utah. So I went to Alta High School, and
So
uh,
like 100 south,
yeah, I was around 110th South,
110
um,
south.
around 10th East, that general area.
Now, is there also an Alta High School that's FLDS, or are there two different things, or
Oh, I
maybe
haven't
it's
heard
just
that.
Alta School, I think, but Alta High School would be a public school.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't heard about the FLDS Alta School.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so then you became a teacher and priest. Did you have? Now you were almost like the one of the few Aaronic priesthood holders, except for maybe some of the new English-speaking Filipinos in your ward.
Yeah, it was especially because the ward was mostly made up of a lot of senior missionaries. There were very few kids in the ward, people my age.
So it was like
Um,
you passing the sacrament with 6 other high priests or something.
yeah, there was like two other people passing the sacrament. Like it was like me, a kid that was also my age, like maybe one teacher, and then a handful of adults.
Right.
Yeah,
And then you go to Utah, and it's like everybody around you is Mormon, just about.
yeah. So
And
that
your
was
ward is like a 6 block square area.
exactly. Yeah, that's pretty much what it was. I could walk my whole ward boundaries in 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
And
that
then,
was, I mean, it was a good way to grow up. I don't have animosity towards my youth. I think that my parents were good parents. They did the best they could, just like, hopefully like any parent. But
did you do Boy Scouts? Did you have to catch up a little bit to catch up to your
well,
Utah friends?
we did also do Boy Scouts in the Philippines as well.
Okay.
So although it wasn't through the LDS Church, it was through
The local.
yeah, I was just meeting up with other, people of other Christian faiths and stuff, um, doing scouts with them as well. So, yeah, I didn't have to catch up. I got my eagle at the end of, well, like, right before the deadline.
Okay. So
Yeah.
you didn't have a you can't drive until you get your Eagle type of
No,
parent.
luckily my parents were a little more, I was the last child, so they were probably a little more lenient on me than they were on my my older siblings.
Yeah. My youngest brother pretty much grew up parentless because they were done with. They already had 4 boys that they had parented, and they were like, "Go take you be in charge of yourself."
Right. Yeah. I mean, my mom also, she would work sometimes, but she also tried to make an effort to like be there for me when I got home from school and stuff. So, but I also had freedom to go hang out with my friends for hours
Yeah.
on end without having to report in. So,
And what were your favorite classes at Alta?
um, man, I mean, I kind of really liked doing, um, computer stuff, specifically like the creative art kind of stuff, Photoshop classes, video editing classes, those kinds of things. So when I went to college, I ended up going into communications with the idea that I would lean into like the graphic design kind of route. And then like maybe a year or two in, I realized I'm not good enough of an artist to go that route. So
Right, because even if you use a computer, you still have to be an artist to
yeah,
do computer
exactly.
aided design and stuff like that, or whatever.
Yeah. So I kind of feel like I went to BYU Idaho, by the way.
Okay.
So I kind of feel like my major was headed one direction, and then I didn't change it. I was just like, I don't want to start over. So I just finished it off, and I haven't
Did you
really used it until
did you play video games a lot,
some.
or
I mean, not.
they weren't like
I wouldn't
hooks?
consider myself a gamer, but I did play some video games. Yeah, like Super
Mhm.
Smash Brothers. That was probably my biggest one.
And then, do you do any online gaming now?
Nothing online. All of the
Okay.
gaming that I do now is kind of more of the, like building roller coasters kind of
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah.
My son-in-law teaches at a charter school in Casa Grande, Arizona, and he is the coach for the online gaming team, the
Wow.
school team, and they won like the Western region or something like that. So he got some accolades for his
Nice.
school for doing that.
Yeah, that's
So
not me.
you're not jealous of that. You're not, oh, I wish they had a gaming team when I was a kid.
No, I'm okay with the amount of gaming I've done.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so as you're approaching graduation from high school, you're thinking about college, so you're applying for BYU. It's way before they lowered the age, right? Or was the lowering
Yeah.
the age?
When did they lower the age? That was like 2012, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I went in 2008. So
Yeah. So you that wasn't part of you. You didn't even experience any of that at all. But
um, right.
so did you do 1 year of college and then go on a mission?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Two semesters, and then went on my mission right after
So
that.
you
So
did two semesters at BYU, Idaho.
yep. In
That's
fact,
the other side of the state, from where you grew up.
yeah, exactly. I had a few siblings that had gone there in years prior as well, so I just kind of felt like, well, I actually had a lot of. I was doing choir in high school and stuff, and a lot of my
Okay.
choir buddies were going to the Aggies, and so I
Yeah,
was going to
Utah
go.
State.
Yeah, I was going to go to Utah State. I got accepted there as well, but then I just kind of I just decided if I go to Utah State, that's like, the way I was thinking about it, that's like the school where they do a lot of sinning, and I'm afraid
The
that I'm going to make
heathens.
bad decisions if I go there. So yeah, I went.
Yeah, the heathens go there. You wanted to go to the Lord's other university.
Yeah, so I basically went up there by myself without knowing anybody else that was going up there.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, because a
so
lot of kids go as groups, like a couple of
right,
buddies get together and they say, "Let's go to this school or that school or whatever."
yeah,
And you were just took a dive in there.
yeah.
And so you did the student ward thing. And did you have a good bishop? Did they help you do your papers up there, or?
You know what? My bishops at BYU Idaho weren't memorable. I don't really remember anything about them. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Uh,
As a student, as a freshman, the elders quorum president is like 2 years older than you,
right. Yeah.
and so that's
Um,
kind of a weird feeling, I bet.
it is. It definitely is. and but I guess you just kind of get used to it. That's just how things work over there.
And I suppose a bunch of women that don't have any kids, although they might have kids in Relief Society, depending on what student ward you're in. Were they
Yeah, they
children?
do normally separate out the single ward versus the married wards. So
Yeah, because once you're married, you might go to just a married ward or even a local if you wanted to, I guess,
mhm,
if you lived off campus or something.
right,
But yeah, so that's a different experience. But and they have at BYU Idaho, they have devotionals the same as BYU, where like
yeah,
every Tuesday or something at 11.
right, yeah, and you could listen to them on. I listen to them on the radio because they would broadcast.
Right, the radio. That was my
Yeah,
wife went to BYU and I visited a few times and actually lived there for a little bit, but I worked. And so, but I remember hearing of that. You could hear the devotional on the radio.
yeah.
And so you're taking computer classes and how are you doing in all the other classes? History, English, math.
Generally pretty good. I'm kind of I like to prepare a lot, so oftentimes I did a lot of my homework just beforehand, and then I would never remember when it was due. The teacher would say like, "Hey, this is due," and it's like, "Oh, good thing I did this last week because I'd forgotten that I had done it." So that was a lot of my stuff. But I maintain around like a 3.5 GPA, so it was decent.
And who was the president of the school when you were there?
I want to say Clark.
Clark.
I can't remember
That
his
was
first name.
that was right after Bednar.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kim
David
CUNY
Bednar.
Clark. Yeah.
David Bednar grew up 5 miles from where I live, but he
Oh,
was
really?
a generation and a half of high school older than me, maybe 2 generations.
Oh,
And
gotcha.
so I knew of somebody that knew him, and they said that they played golf with him as 17, 18-year-olds, and he would swear like a sailor whenever he made a bad shot.
Really? Oh man,
He said, "Don't ever tell anybody." So it's just
that's funny
between
to
you and
hear.
I. Just
Yeah.
between you and I. Don't tell anybody else.
I won't tell anyone. I'll tell my dogs to keep it quiet.
But who hasn't sworn at some point, right?
Yeah. Well, I haven't ever. I'm
There you
just
go.
joking.
I remember graduating from high school, never having publicly uttered swear words, but they might have been in my mind a little
Yeah.
bit, sometimes.
I remember having a lot of moments where I was just so angry at something. The garage door won't open with the
Just
code,
blurt out.
and I'm just like, I can feel it bubbling up, bubbling up. I want to swear, but I don't want to. And yeah.
That's right.
And then I felt
And-
bad as soon as I did.
But my summer job after graduating from high school, I was like, I'm an adult now. I should know how to swear. And so I would drive to work practicing swearing,
Practice.
but I wouldn't do it at work because I was a Mormon at work. And so I had to set an example because even though the mechanic and the owner were like old man kids that would swear, and they probably had a pinup girl, in the wall in the oil change bay and stuff like that. Um, everybody's a potential Mormon, so you want to be the good example no matter where
Yeah.
you go. Still, but I wanted to have that in my belt of knowing how to swear. It reminds me of there's a movie called Paul where he's an alien. I don't know if you've seen that movie. It's
I
like
haven't.
13 years ago it came out, and Seth Rogen plays the voice of Paul, and the guy that plays Scotty on the new Star Trek movies, he and his buddy go to Comic-Con, and they also want to do the Black Mailbox and different Roswell and different things, and they're excited to do these American alien tourist spots, and they stumble across an alien that had and it's just a funny movie, but they also uh, kidnap sort of a Bible bashing sort of kind of a girl, like a very religious, and they have to tell her that religion's not a thing, and Paul the alien can put his hand on her head and give her like a million books worth of knowledge
Uh-huh.
all at once. And so now she realizes that, there's no such thing as God or religion. It's all just evolution.
Yeah.
And she has to practice swearing in that movie.
Oh, okay.
So when I saw that, I thought, oh, there's at least two of us, even though she's a fictional character.
Right. Yeah, I
And
can't say
so,
I practiced it. I let it out occasionally, but I tried to keep it down.
so you do your year and you put your electric papers in maybe, and you get, I don't know, they had it online back then?
Submitting them online. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think I submitted online.
And you get your call. Where do you go?
To North Carolina.
North Carolina. So you learn a foreign language.
No, unfortunately. You know what? Funny enough, that was actually one of the things that started kind of causing a crack in my worldview, because I felt like I had received a spiritual impression that I would go Spanish speaking, to the point where I had bought a Spanish English dictionary, and I was starting to study diligently. I had taken Spanish classes in high school as well, but I tried to really start practicing it, because I was like, I know I'm going Spanish speaking. And then when I got called to North Carolina, I was like, oh, what happened there? Why did why was I so convinced?
Yeah. Was God just teasing me? What
Right.
was going on there?
Yeah.
And so how was your mission?
Um, it was a mixed bag for sure. I would say that my mission is really the period of time where I was introduced to all of my doubts. The first 11 months were pretty normal and good. I was really stressed out, really anxious about a bunch of stuff, trying to be a good missionary, but not feeling adequate enough. Um, and then around the 11-month mark, a bunch of, well, I guess I'll just tell you the story quickly. It was like I was the district leader at the time, and we were having a whole bunch of people. We had missionaries in the area. We were getting together for a P day, and someone had suggested that we go to a like an abandoned
Strip club?
warehouse,
Not a
because they
strip club?
no, not no, not to a strip club. That we go to abandoned warehouse just to check it out and see what it was like. And so everyone had gone just to be safe in case there was anyone hiding in there or something. Everyone went and got some of their weapons that they'd bought from the flea market, little knives and bats and stuff like that. And so we went in there, and then by the time we came out, someone had called the cops on us. We were not in our proselyting clothes. We were in just like street clothes. And so people thought we were a gang waiting to fight a rival gang, because we had all these weapons with us. And so the cops showed up, arrested, a few of the people got put in handcuffs. I was too cheap to have bought weapons, so they just told me to sit in the grass and be quiet. But, one of the guys ended up being processed and charged, and he
For
had to do
brandishing a
community
weapon?
service with his next companion. So
Wow.
it was, it was an interesting, but in
That
that,
is a good story.
yeah, it was a situation where, I, because of all of that, my mission president released me as district leader. Clearly I wasn't responsible enough. And then I guess I was just kind of like, and also I really didn't like my companion at that time. So those two experiences really kind of made me just be like, I'm ready to go home, but I'm too afraid to go home.
Right. You don't want to be there, but you don't want to go home dishonorably.
Right.
You don't want to
Exactly.
let your parents down.
Yeah. So I stayed out there and just kind of, um, I tried sometimes, but other times I was just kind of like really wrestling with a lot of doubts. I'd had a number of other experiences on my mission of like other spiritual confirmations that I was receiving, that I thought, I know for a fact that's going to happen, and then it doesn't happen, and then I'm just left wondering like, what's going on.
So you
So
were a physically in, mentally out missionary for the
yeah,
last year.
yeah, and I wouldn't say that I disbelieved, but I was struggling with a lot of doubts for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Did any of the doubts come from ministers or people handing out pamphlets or challenging Mormon
Um,
history or anything like that?
Not challenging. I had a fair amount of like Bible bashing situations, basically meeting up with Jehovah's Witnesses on the street and having a little powwow in the middle of the
Right.
street.
The real cult.
Right.
We're not a cult. Jehovah's Witnesses, they're the
No, they
culty
are.
ones.
Yeah, I would say it wasn't even Bible bashing. It was being part of one of the service projects that we did. Weekly, we would go to a food bank where a Baptist preacher had put the whole thing together, and he was giving out boxes of food to hundreds of families every week. And so we went and helped be part of that, putting boxes of food together. And it was that situation, which happened right after I got released as district leader and all that kind of stuff. So it was like coming off the back of that and then realizing this guy that is supposed to be, one of the evil preachers that I have learned about, part of one of these false churches, is like the most Christ-like person I've ever met, because he's
Right.
handing out
How
all
can
this.
that be?
Right. So I
Yeah.
basically, that was just one of those other, I guess I just had a lot of like worldview cracking experiences like that on my mission, where
Right.
it was just like, this doesn't add up.
Now, you went to the temple for the first time just before your mission.
Yeah.
And so I guess we skipped that. What, just give us like a 30-second what you thought about it.
Yeah, I will say that I actually had an experience very different than most people. I came away from that on a spiritual high. I remember telling my mom afterwards. She asked me what I thought of it, and I remember saying to her, I don't know how anyone could go through that experience and then leave the church. So, things have clearly changed since then, but that's how I
Yeah.
was feeling at the time.
Like I was cool with it and thought it was, fun because I was learning about clubs and initiation and things. And I just
Yeah.
figured, well, this is what God said to Joseph, you should do some sort of initiation. Joseph cobbled something together, right? Because I knew that it had a lot of Masonic Freemasonry stuff in it. And that's just what Joseph needed to create this initiatory thing, right?
Yeah.
And so I was okay with it. My wife didn't like it, and if it wasn't for the fact that her parents and a lot of people in the ward supported us as we were going through the first time, it had that not happened, she might have walked out or
Yeah.
thought I'm in a cult or something like that. But she
My
just was like, all these loved ones, smart people think I must be missing something. I'm flawed. God's not telling me how great this is. Something's wrong with me. It can't be the temple that's bad. But
right.
once we figured stuff out in COVID summer, then she was able to finally tell me 25 or whatever years, 35 years after going through it, that she did not like it.
My ex had a similar experience, and it wasn't until she told me about her, seeing all of her fears and anxieties going through that process, and then trying it again later on, and not having any better experience, that it also kind of started opening my eyes to those kinds of things as well,
Right.
that I hadn't seen from my perspective.
So you come back for your mission, you're kind of shaken a little bit, but
Yeah.
you can focus on schooling now, and
Yeah.
you go back to BYU, Idaho.
Yep. Exactly. And
And did you change as a student? Were you a better student after your mission?
it was probably about the same.
Okay.
I
Did you
mean,
change your
I had
major a little
one
bit?
semester where I got a 4.0, but that was the rest of the time it was more like 3.2 or whatever. So I don't know.
And did going on your mission change the focus of what you wanted to do with life a little bit or anything,
Um,
or was it mostly classes and learning that you weren't that great of an artist?
yeah, that was more of it. I felt confident that that would be what the direction I wanted to go with it, and it just wasn't until I finished school and was like, I don't feel like I really learned very much, especially in a degree like communications, because it was so broad. I kind of backed out of the design, like the graphic design thing, and just kind of went broad communications, which doesn't focus on anything in particular. And so I just felt like my schooling was more of a piece of paper than actually an education.
Okay. And your mission president said, go to school and get married. And how'd you
Yeah.
do on his commandments?
Well, I did really well. I went back to school and married the first girl that I dated. So, yeah, and I met her the first day of class. So, it was one
Things
of those.
fall into place, when you have your patriarchal blessing says you're going to go to school and get married, and the mission president says go to school and get married, and you're at school, and then all of a sudden God provides you with the sacrificial lamb, we'll say,
Yeah,
right? He provides a way, just like when Joseph Smith needed a vision and needed to find the plates, they were right in his backyard all along.
right. Yeah. So
Go figure.
it worked out. It worked out for Joseph. Didn't work out for me.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, in a way, it's the same thing. You had to give back your golden plates to an angel at the end.
Yeah, I guess that's one way to look at it.
And so you where do you move to when you start your career or whatever, and you're married?
I was gonna go be. My goal at that point had changed. I was working as a manager at Chick-fil-A in Idaho Falls, and I was planning on doing an internship in Georgia at Chick-fil-A headquarters. And so I went down there and did the interview process and everything, and they ended up not selecting me. I think because they didn't like my voicemail memo when they left a voicemail. My thing I had seen on a show or something, I copied it where my voicemail was just, what to do. That was
You
it.
thought you were being cute, and they
Yeah,
thought you were being unoriginal.
yeah. Well, I don't know, unoriginal, maybe unprofessional. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then what do you do?
So then I thought that I had the internship in the bag. So maybe this is another experience where I was like, all right, we know it's going to happen. The spirits told me we're going, So we had a U-Haul rented, and then I didn't get the internship. And then we decided to call the U-Haul and just say, we're changing direction. We moved to Oregon instead. So, yeah, drove out to Oregon and lived there.
Yeah, the Lord works in mysterious ways.
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
Almost like he doesn't know what the hell he's doing.
Right. Yeah, it definitely is a mystery. So, yeah, we moved out to Oregon and just got jobs as temp workers. I was a data entry person for a while, and then just
What city?
It was near Portland, just on the outskirts of Portland. And then basically just like worked my way up through the company until I just found myself more in like the database industry and doing those kinds of data related jobs.
Okay. And so you're still going to church all this time, and you're having callings, but are you physically in and mentally out in the church, or are you still, does it take a long time?
Very much so. I got married in 2011, and I would say by 2013, I was probably mostly mentally out. Although I had not told my wife, I was terrified to tell her. So by the time I finally worked up the courage to tell her around 2013, she didn't take it very well. Understandably, we were supposed to be eternal companions. And then
Was research the answer to your doubts, or did you do?
no, I had absolutely no idea that there even was anything to research at this time. It was all in my own head, just thinking about experiences and just kind of growing agnostic over time. Like, this doesn't make sense. If God is there, he doesn't seem to be listening, or he doesn't seem to care, or, that kind of stuff. So,
and if the Baptist can be a better Christian than any bishop I've ever known.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Mission. Yeah. So it's just a lot of stuff like that. So I really didn't. I think that a difference. We'll get into more of this later when we're talking about my channel. But I think a difference is that I think a lot of people had, when they learned about church history, it was a very volatile situation where it's like they're learning information and it's shaking them. I didn't have that experience until after I had already concluded that I was done. We'd already decided to leave the church. I already told my family. And then I finally was like, I've been told my whole life to never research anything about church history, never look up anything anti-Mormons are saying. So if I'm not going to be part of the church, I'm kind of curious now. And then I finally looked it up and started researching stuff. So it came from more from a curiosity thing, and it didn't feel like a slap in the face. It just felt like, whoa, this is amazing. So much
Right.
information.
And you feel a little bit confirmed in
Yeah.
your belief that they weren't doing the right things or whatever.
Yeah.
And also you realize anti-Mormon stuff is just history and science.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. It's it's definitely interesting how you just start to think about things in a different way.
So you and your wife grow apart, and partly because of this.
Partly because of that, she did leave the church as well. There was about
Mhm.
a year where I was attending church with her, just as a courtesy to her, and then she eventually, read essays on the, read as soon as the church came out with the essays.
The
She was
gospel
reading about,
topics essays.
yeah, she was reading about like polygamy and stuff, and then she decided she was done.
Now, people say that the gospel topics essays are hard to find, so I'm going to try to find them and include them in the description
Yeah,
of the show, as well as a link to your channel. We'll talk about the creation of your channel pretty soon.
cool.
And so, also at this time, if people are still watching, what's good for channels is for people to click the like, thumbs up button and subscribe. And I'm going to suggest that people also go to Mormon Auditor and hit the like button and subscribe to your channel. But we'll get into how if there's anything in between that point of your life that we're talking about and starting your channel, you can tell us, and then we'll talk about starting your channel.
Yeah, well, I guess just leading up to that, once my wife had left the church as well, our marriage did improve for a while. We were kind of on the same page again, but
You
then,
have a second Saturday to do more dates and go
yeah,
do things together.
yeah. But ultimately, the whole thing was based on kind of a sandy foundation anyway, just because a big part of why we got married was because we were supposed to, and um, you know it was that kind of situation. So it was just one of those things that it felt like it was inevitable. It was just a matter of time before we decided to move on. So it's more complicated than that, but
And
marriage is
did you guys get degrees together, or did she drop
yeah.
out of school to be a mom?
No, she graduated before me, actually. So
Okay,
then she was working as a waitress while I finished school.
right. So that's one thing that divorce is sometimes not an option for some women because they don't have a degree. They don't have much of a backup plan, right?
Yeah.
God wanted them to get married and be a mom, be a mother in heaven, and they're just doing the mother things. And so if there becomes a rocky part of the marriage, or one spouse uh, leaves the church and now their eternal salvation is at risk, it's still not very much of an option for them to get a divorce. And
Yeah.
so your wife could see a way out as well, I assume.
Yeah. And we separated pretty amicably, about as, we were able to do the whole thing without lawyers and stuff. So it was you know, about as amicable as it can be.
And did you
But
have kids?
no, we didn't. So that was another thing that made it a lot easier. That would have really complicated things. So I kind of feel grateful that we didn't have kids.
Right. And so what else happens before you start your channel?
Um, I mean, I moved around a couple of times, but ultimately, I've moved out to the country, out to the Midwest, and basically, I'm just kind of doing the bachelor thing for now. Living my single years that I never really lived before, and enjoying that time before.
You didn't go on any dates as a missionary.
Right.
And as soon as you were done with your mission, you found one girl and married her.
Yeah.
And so yes, our social lives are very narrowly
Right.
limited.
Yeah. And I'm not even that particularly, like, I'm not a super social person. So I guess I kind of feel grateful that I'm somebody that I enjoy just spending a lot of alone time because it gives me time to think, which is where a lot of my like Mormon Auditor stuff comes from, because I'm always absorbing information, listening to podcasts, and just thinking about stuff. And I guess really where the idea came from is the fact that when I initially left the church and learned about problems with church history and stuff, it kind of boiled down to just a lot of the stuff that's like in the CES letter. But as I continued to learn about it, just out of a pure curiosity and fascination with the whole thing, I've kind of learned that it's a lot more complicated than that. I would say maybe half of the CES letter is stuff I would even agree with anymore. And so really what I'm trying to do in my channel is find better arguments. Identifying where we've got strong arguments over here, where we've got weak arguments that we can toss aside and stop focusing on those. And simultaneously on the apologist side, trying to be as fair as I can be. Obviously, I've got a side. I'm on the critic side. That's where I think the evidence is the strongest. But I'm trying to be fair as well and give, as part of the channel, I give points and I grade. And so I'm giving positive and minus points to give them positive points when they make points that I agree with, and then take away points when I think that they've made a bad argument.
Right, because that's one thing that defenders of the faith or apologists don't get about critics is that why, critic, aren't you fair and balanced, right? Why aren't you giving both sides of the issue? Sort of, the church does a lot of good, right? And how come you're just attacking? And a critic might say, well, you have 100,000 missionaries on your side already that only talk about the good things in the church.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just one content creator that's giving my opinion or presenting other things. The church has vehicles. They have the Deseret News. They have Deseret Bookstore. They have all kinds of other professionally produced apologetics and other things that they find ways to get money towards them, and that's what they don't understand, is that we're just saying some of the things that are in error or that we see the church can improve on for a certain reason. And so there's a philosophy behind your channel. What is the philosophy behind someone wanting to be critical but fair of the church?
Mm-hmm.
What motivates that?
I guess the philosophy would just be the fact that a lot of my family are still very devout members, and I think that they are good people I respect. Obviously, we disagree on the facts. Well, we have different interpretations of the facts, and sometimes they're not aware of the facts. So it's both trying to be educational, but also just coming from, I've had a lot of in-depth discussions with siblings and stuff who are on the opposite side of the aisle from me, and they're good conversations. And so I can kind of see where they're coming from. I can see why they apply the faith in the way that they do. And then I'm offering my perspective. And over time, my opinions have changed on a number of things. I've softened up on some things. I found better arguments on this side over here, or better arguments over here. So I guess that's really the philosophy is, I'm not the arbiter of truth or anything. I'm just kind of on the journey trying to figure out what is true. And as I discover certain arguments that I think are weak or inadequate, I'm trying to winnow those out and instead replace them with something stronger. Or
Right.
if I can't find something stronger, then maybe it's time for me to change my opinion and move more to the middle on that particular issue or something.
And so are you trying to destroy the church or anybody's faith?
No, I mean, I guess I would say I have a number of family members who I wouldn't ever want them to leave the church, because I think that they've greatly benefited from it and have had good lives because of it. So, I have conversations with them sometimes, but sometimes I just I don't need to go into something like Book of Abraham with them, because why, if they're not already questioning or struggling or anything like that, why, you know?
That's right. And John Dehlin of Mormon Stories, and I say sometimes as well, um, there's there's almost no way the church can be destroyed. It has hundreds of billions of dollars in assets,
Yeah.
and John Dehlin makes $200,000 a year, and his Open Stories Foundation might generate over $1 million. But that's if people knew what the difference between hundreds of billions and millions are, they would understand. It's hard to conceptualize that,
Right.
right? I remember somebody saying something. If you could spend like $20 million a day for every single day of your life, by the time you were 55, you still wouldn't have spent all the money the church has. Whatever it is, I don't know if that's the exact thing, but
Yeah.
it's something like that, which it just seems so astronomically huge. If you just say, $30 trillion, it just sounds like 30 somethings, right?
Right. Yeah.
But it's a lot of money. It's
Yeah.
like, I don't know, the whole world is worth like $100 trillion or something like that,
Wow.
in the value of everything. And so anyhow, yeah, we're just trying to. We could even say our philosophy is to make the church, to help the church change for the better, to be healthier and safer for our relatives and family that are still attending.
Exactly. In fact, the last video that I put out on my channel a few weeks ago was basically calling out John Gee, who is an apologist that I really don't like. I think he makes a bunch of really terrible arguments. But it was his response to another apologist who was a more middle of the road, nuanced apologist, and they kind of had a spat there where he was disagreeing with him. So I was basically pointing out all the ways in which John Gee's arguments fall apart. But I can see on the other apologist side, the more nuanced middle of the road guy, um, where he's coming from, and I'm like, all right, this isn't convincing to me to like come back to the church, but I can see how someone could land there and enjoy their time in the church with that.
and like, power to them.
Yeah.
If every member knew what you knew, and they decided to stay in the church, fine,
Hmm.
right? Just don't say that it's not history that we'll say, a revelation that John Taylor did about polygamy that caused basically the fundamentalist sects of the church that are polygamists now to operate. Don't
Right.
say that they did everything based on a lie or deception or a fraud or a what do you call it when somebody makes up a document? Falsification. They change the words. They like
Forge.
yeah, forgeries, right? So
Uh-huh.
the church, I think, thought that if a letter existed from John Taylor, I heard some people, or at least that's the impression I got, that if such a letter existed, it was a forgery. It wasn't really signed by John Taylor. It wasn't a real thing. The
Right.
church doesn't know about it. You know, and now that it exists and it is on the church's historical website as a historical document that has John Taylor's handwriting, and then they type it out so that it's readable. And there were copies passed around, and there were efforts in the early 1900s to suggest that it wasn't uh, a real revelation, even though it did exist. Uh, those things are truthful, that really happened, right? And does it mean the church isn't true or not? It doesn't. But it could lead somebody to realize that there's lots of quote unquote revelations that
Mhm.
don't become canonized. And then it makes you wonder, like, if God says something to his prophet, why wouldn't a church just canonize it and say, da-da, God talked to the world through this prophet, and we're standing by it,
That's
right?
pretty much how it was sold to all of us. So yeah, that's why it makes you wonder when that's not how it works.
Yeah. And I'm learning lots of things. Like there's this scripture committee even in like Nauvoo. And then I realized that the book of Abraham, which was what, we all think was Joseph Smith translating some Egyptian papyrus, right?
Mhm.
Wasn't part of the canon until like 1881 or something like that.
Yeah, came
Like,
a lot
why
later.
wasn't it part of the canon like the minute the ink dried?
Right.
Right? If Joseph Smith is getting revelation to uh, reconstruct this book of Abraham from the hand of Abraham,
Mhm.
why wouldn't that immediately just be what everybody believes? It's just
Yeah.
it was part of my deconstruction. If somebody
Yeah.
else says, "Oh yeah, the church waiting 30 years to confirm stuff that God says is the way things should be," all power to you.
Yeah.
But for some people, those types of things make it indistinguishable from, we'll say, fraud.
Yeah.
Uh, and
Um,
so,
I I actually um, the next video I'm going to put out that probably next week, in the next week or so, is kind of working on a new theory that I've been pondering for the last year or so. Where as I'm doing a lot of research for the channel, I'm diving into original sources and all that kind of stuff. And
ponderizing,
what's that?
ponderizing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I wear my Ponderize T-shirt while I'm doing it. But I basically am just kind of thinking about Joseph in a different way. I guess I won't go into too much detail here because I have to make an entire case. But I'm going to be pitching this new theory as basically viewing Joseph as how did he view himself, and providing what I think is a way that he could have viewed himself that has a lot of explanatory power into the things he was doing throughout his life and stuff like the Book of Mormon and Temple and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to be pitching that for people's consideration in my next video, and we'll see if it's well received or if I'm off the rails or if I'm on the right track here. So
Part of that is in the vein of Ganesh Chirian's work. Have you heard of Ganesh Chirian before?
I can't think of that. No.
Okay, so he is writing a book like the history of Joseph Smith, and it just came out. And I'm butchering the title, but I'll show a link in the description. And later on, in a week or so, I'm going to have an interview with him and talk about his book. And he talks about how Joseph Smith's life is intertwined with creating scriptures, right?
Hmm.
Whenever some scripture is created, even the Book of Mormon has fingerprints of Joseph Smith's the life around him. And
Yeah.
so in a way that those are similar things. And and you know, uh, Dan Vogel considers Joseph Smith a pious fraud.
Hmm.
And people are thinking, like, oh no, Joseph's a fraud all the way. And Dan Vogel holds space that Joseph Smith actually thought he was doing good, that he was bringing people to Jesus, and that even though he had his own weaknesses, we'll say,
Hmm.
that he overall he might have felt that God was talking to him and he was spreading the word as good as he could. And so,
Yeah. In fact, the theory I'll be pitching is kind of using that idea as a basis. Dan was the one that introduced me to that idea, but I'm going to add a few new elements to it. So some things that I've discovered in my own research that I don't hear anyone talking about that I think can help better explain that concept and reinforce why I think Dan is right about that and take it a step further.
okay, that sounds great. So, how did you come up with Mormon Auditor?
Um, I knew that I wanted to approach it from a perspective of like giving positive points and negative points, and Mormon Auditor just had a ring to it that I liked. So,
Yeah, an auditor is kind of a neutral person who steps into a business or some situation and just tries to assess to the best possible way what's happening.
right. Yeah.
They're not trying to destroy anything or build anything up. They're just saying, these are the facts as I see them.
Right.
And so that is a really great name. And I'm glad that I stumbled upon your channel. And
Awesome.
all the best to you. And hopefully lots of people will, at least 3 or 4 will join up your subscription base.
Yeah, I
build up
appreciate
your
it.
subscription base. And because I think the way you present it is a new sort of way, a new voice, another part of the Mormon spectrum that will be beneficial to somebody. There's 1,000 things that can keep you in the church, and there's 1,000 things that you can drive you away from the church. And it's not just one thing.
Yeah,
I mean, and I mean, it is one thing, but it's too hard to say 1,000 things to somebody until you're like, hey, here's this. What do you
right,
think now? How about this? How
right,
about this? And so your way is going to get to the people that could either use your content to be a more nuanced Mormon, somebody that, to me, the gospel of Christ is a gospel of love. And it does seem like there's a little too much gospel of obedience that has crept in.
yeah,
And if more people can preach the gospel of love within the LDS church, I think it'll be a better place for my loved ones. And
right,
so
yeah,
hopefully that will happen. And so thanks a lot for coming on the show.
yeah. Thank you for having me, Gene.
And I can't wait for the new episode. And everybody check for the Mormon Auditor episode and look in the description. Everybody have a great rest of 2025. It's almost the middle of the year.
Yeah,
And so that's the time flying by is a fascinating thing. I like airplanes because they fly by, and I like time because it flies by as well.
well, lately airplanes haven't been flying by too well, but
That's right. Well, they've been shaky. Time sometimes is shaky
yeah.
too. All right.
All right,
We'll
thanks,
talk to
Gene.
you later and see everybody. Have a great rest of the year. Bye bye.
See ya.